Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder why babies and toddlers seem to want to put everything in their mouths? It's like they're fearless when it comes to germs. Then, as they get older, they suddenly become a lot more cautious about what they touch and eat. Well, this new study might have a clue. It turns out that this change from being super curious and a bit germy to being more careful isn't just random. It is actually a carefully timed developmental process, like building a map for how kids learn to avoid getting sick. So, what these researchers did was ask over 3,000 parents in the UK and us to tell them about their kids' behaviors. From when they were tiny babies all the way up to about 10 years old, they looked at 39 different actions, things like mouthing objects, touching dirty surfaces, washing their hands, and even making a disgust face. The big puzzle they started with is pretty simple. We know that getting sick when you are little can be a big deal. It can really set back growth and even affect brain development. But despite this huge risk, young kids act like they don't even notice potential germs. They'll eat food off the floor, put their fingers in their mouths, and touch grubby things without a second thought. So the question is, why are they so unbothered? The researchers have a few ideas. Think about it, babies and toddlers don't really understand invisible things like germs. They haven't developed that ew gross feeling, that disgust response, which is a big cue for adults to avoid danger. Also, basic hygiene like hand washing requires a lot of coordination and learning, which little kids are still figuring out. But here is a really interesting twist. They suggest it might also be a clever trade-off. Young kids need to explore their world to learn. If they were constantly scared of germs, they wouldn't touch or taste things, and they'd miss out on a huge amount of learning. So maybe it is actually good for them to be a little less cautious when they're small, to maximize their learning during a critical time, and even to help their immune systems get calibrated by encountering some microbes. This trade-off is super clear when you look at babies putting things in their mouths. It's not just random, it's how they explore textures, shapes, and tastes. Gathering information, even though it increases their risk of getting sick, it's super important for their development. So, by mapping out when these different behaviors show up and disappear, the researchers can shed light on how this whole germ avoidance system builds up over time. They can see if certain skills, like understanding contamination or developing disgust, come first and enable other behaviors. It's like finding the building blocks of our built-in defense system. The problem is, before this study, we didn't really have a clear picture of this. We have bits and pieces, like some idea about when kids start to look disgusted, or when they might start washing their hands, but it has been all over the place, and nobody had put it all together. So instead of asking parents if their child would feel disgusted by something hypothetical, they asked if they had actually seen a specific behavior in the last month. This makes it much more concrete. Things like, did your child put things in their mouth or did they wash their hands? They ended up with data from over 3,000 parents about kids aged 0 to 10 years. That is a huge amount of information. They then organized this information by the child's age in months. This allowed them to see when each behavior became common, like when more than 50% of kids that age were doing it, and when it started to fade away. Now, for the really juicy part, what did they find? They plotted out each behavior's journey over time. Some behaviors, like putting things in their mouths, were super common from the start, peaking around 7 months. But then they dropped off pretty quickly. They saw that behaviors that increase exposure to germs, like mouthing and spreading bodily fluids, were most frequent in infancy and toddlerhood. These were the riskier behaviors. Then they looked at the protective behaviors, things like hygiene routines, hand washing and toothbrushing, and also disgust responses. These started to emerge later, mostly in toddlerhood and early childhood, and then stayed pretty stable as the kids got older. What is really cool is that they found two major turning points. Around the second year of life, there is a switch from those early exploratory, risk-prone behaviors starting to decline. And then around the fourth year, even more protective, organized behaviors start to really take off. It's like the kid's pathogen-avoidance brain is being built in stages. So this study gives us this amazing map. It shows that when it comes to avoiding germs, kids aren't just automatically protected. Their brains and bodies develop the necessary skills and responses over time. For example, they found that the first signs of disgust are often related to taste and what kids put in their mouths. This makes sense, as the body's first defense against toxins is often bitter taste. Then, later, disgust responses to touch and sight develop. And hygiene behaviors develop in steps. Assisted routines like parents helping with hand washing or brushing teeth start around 21 months, but independent, self-sufficient hygiene takes much longer to master, with many kids not quite getting it right even by age 7. Interestingly, disgust related to things like morality or sex didn't show up at all in this age range. This is likely because the situations that trigger those kinds of disgust are much more complex and usually don't appear until later childhood or adolescence, when social rules and romantic relationships become more relevant. The researchers grouped these behaviors into clusters. Clusters 1 and 2 were the early risk-taking behaviors. Clusters 3 and 4 were the later protective ones. This clustering really highlights that organized shift happening. It really reinforces the idea that these early behaviors, where kids seem oblivious to germs, are part of a broader strategy of exploration before protection kicks in. They are learning about the world, and that sometimes means taking a bit of a risk. What does this all mean for us? Well, it can help parents and educators understand that it is normal for young kids to be less cautious about germs. Instead of getting too stressed, we can focus on guiding them as they develop these avoidance skills. We can provide lots of opportunities for them to practice hygiene, model good behavior, and create safe environment. Now, of course, like any study, this one has its limits. Since it relied on what parents reported, there might be some things they missed or remembered differently. Also, this study looked at different age groups, but it is not the same as following the same kids as they grow up over time. And of course, experiences can vary a lot between different cultures and countries. Future studies could use more high-tech methods like tracking devices or even video recordings to get an even clearer picture, and definitely looking at kids in different parts of the world would be valuable. So, to wrap it all up, this research gives us a fantastic developmental map of how kids learn to avoid germs. It shows us there is a real trade-off between exploring the world and staying safe, and how children's brains orchestrate this balance over time. It is a reminder that a lot of what we see as risky behavior in kids is actually a crucial part of them learning and growing. What do you think about these findings? Has this made you see your own kids' germy habits in a new light? Let me know in the comments below. And if you found this useful, please hit that like button, subscribe to RUBIN'S Mind Lab for more science deep dives, and share this with anyone who might be interested. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.